Most people believe that power lies in the right words, in the perfect argument, in the ability to win arguments. But there is a much more disturbing and much more powerful truth. In the reality of human relationships, those who talk too much have usually already lost control of the situation. True strategists understand something that few dare to admit. Silence can be the most devastating psychological weapon that exists. Machiavelli understood this more than 5 centuries ago. While many leaders tried to win approval and sympathy, the most intelligent observed human behavior with a cool head. They knew that people's minds react in a very specific way when they encounter silence, where they expected a reaction. The brain goes on alert. It starts creating hypotheses. It questions intentions. And without realizing it, the person begins to sabotage themselves emotionally. That's why in many cases, destroying someone's influence doesn't require attack, it requires absence. In this video, you'll understand how some of the darkest principles of Machiavellian psychology reveal something few openly teach. How strategic silence can dismantle provocations, reverse power dynamics, and completely transform how people react to your presence. This isn't about cheap manipulation. It's about understanding human nature as it truly is, and using that understanding to never again fall into the emotional traps that imprison most people. Because when you learn to control your reactions, something curious happens. The game changes, and many people don't even realize when they're already playing on their game board. If something inside you awakened while listening, don't ignore that feeling. This channel isn't about videos, it's about memories. Remember who you were before the fear, before the exhaustion, before the silence. Each new video here is a different reflection of your own soul, an invitation to understand what the world never taught you. The power you seek outside has always been within you. If you feel that this journey speaks to what lives silently within you, sign up now. Not to follow yet another creator, but to reconnect with something the world tried to make you forget. Because here, every word was made to heal, each reflection to awaken, and each video serves as a reminder. You are not alone on the path back to yourself. Click on subscribe and turn the algorithm into a daily reminder of who you really are. There is a type of power that almost no one understands, but which has always been known by the great strategists of history. Machiavelli spoke about this when he taught that politics should be guided by reality, not by ideals. In other words, the world doesn't work as we would like it to, it works as it really is. And in this real world, curiously, those who talk too much lose power. Think about that for a moment. The prince who seeks approval, who responds to every provocation, who tries to justify every move, ends up becoming predictable, and predictability is weakness. But he who remains silent creates something much more powerful, mystery, and mystery generates respect. That is why, since the times of the Renaissance courts, the most astute strategists have learned a simple rule: it is better to be feared than loved, provided one knows how to avoid being hated. Silence, when used well, is not a lack of strength. On the contrary, it is the calculated use of emotional strength. Now observe something curious about real human nature. When someone reacts immediately, people feel they have control over that person. It's almost like pressing a button. It provokes and the reaction comes, but when there is no reaction, something different happens. The other person's mind starts working. Did he notice? Is he planning something? Did I go too far? It is at this moment that the power dynamic changes. Machiavelli would call this virtue in action, the ability to master circumstances with intelligence and constant adaptability. Consider a simple real-life example. Imagine a work environment. A colleague makes an indirect criticism of you in a meeting. Many would react immediately. They would defend their point, argue, try to prove something, but the strategist simply observes, mentally notes it, maintains their posture, and continues working. The effect of this? The criticism loses its force in the air because no one fueled the conflict. History's great leaders understood this intuitively. Julius Caesar, for example, rarely responded to minor attacks. He knew that every unnecessary response diminished his authority. Instead, he reserved his energy for decisive moments. This is where another Machiavellian lesson comes in. The end justifies the means when the goal is to preserve power and stability. It doesn't mean acting cruelly, but acting strategically. Silence, when used correctly, becomes an invisible armor. It prevents you from revealing intentions, emotions, and vulnerabilities to people who don't deserve that access. It's as if you keep your own loyal armies within the walls, while the world outside tries to guess your intentions. And curiously, the less you reveal, the more people project onto you. Some imagine wisdom, others imagine danger, but almost no one imagines weakness. And that's exactly where a very interesting psychological phenomenon begins that few realize: the effect that silence has on the mind of the person on the other side. There's a curious psychological phenomenon that almost no one notices until they experience it. The human mind has extreme difficulty dealing with emptiness. When someone provokes, criticizes, or tries to get attention and receives silence in response, something strange begins to happen inside that person's head. First comes confusion, then restlessness, and soon after, something even more powerful emerges: obsession. That's why, throughout history, strategists who understood true human nature knew how to use silence as a tool of power. Machiavelli observed that decisions based on true human nature produce far more effective results than those guided by romantic ideals. When someone is ignored, the brain desperately tries to fill the empty space. It begins to create stories, assumptions, and interpretations. Did he not care? Did I lose my influence? Is he despising me? Do you see the psychological game unfolding? The absence of reaction creates more impact than any emotional response could generate. Now imagine a simple, everyday situation. Someone sends a provocative message, hoping to start an argument. Maybe it's a passive-aggressive comment at work. Maybe it's a veiled insult in a group chat, or even a public criticism on social media. What do most people do? They respond immediately. They try to explain, defend, justify, but this gives away exactly what the provocateur wanted: attention. When you respond, you fuel the game. Now think about the opposite strategy. The person writes, and nothing happens. No response, no explanation, no reaction. At first it seems strange, even uncomfortable, but then something fascinating happens. The person who provoked begins to feel exposed. Silence acts like an invisible mirror. It reflects the provocation back to the person who made it. This is politics guided by reality, not by ideals. It's understanding that many people act driven by emotion, ego, and the need for validation. This psychological mechanism explains something Machiavelli had already indirectly suggested. It's better to be feared than loved when respect is at stake, but always avoiding being hated. Strategic silence does exactly that. It doesn't attack, doesn't humiliate, doesn't engage in direct conflict, but it also doesn't submit. It creates an aura of emotional control, and emotional control is a silent form of power. People who react to everything become predictable. People who choose when to react become difficult to decipher. And in the social chess game of life, whether in business, relationships, or competitive environments, those who are difficult to decipher are usually a few moves ahead. That's where an even deeper question begins to emerge. When exactly does silence cease to be merely an absence of response and become a deliberate strategy? Because there is a huge difference between disappearing out of weakness and retreating strategically. And few understand this distinction. There is a silent but gigantic difference between disappearing out of weakness and retreating strategically. Most people confuse these two things, and that's precisely why they end up losing power in relationships. When someone disappears because they are hurt, afraid, or trying to avoid confrontation, this is usually perceived as fragility. But when someone withdraws consciously, with a firm posture and emotional control, something completely different happens. Respect arises. Caution arises. Machiavelli taught that leadership requires virtù and fortuna, that is, the ability to act at the right moment and the intelligence to interpret the scenario. In many situations, the true strategic move is not to advance. It is to stop. It is to observe. It is to leave the other person exposed to their own impatience. Strategic retreat is not escape, it is positioning. Think about chess for a moment. An experienced player knows that attacking immediately isn't always the best move. Sometimes moving a piece backward prepares a much more powerful attack a few moves later. The same happens in human relationships. Imagine a professional environment. Someone tries to compete with you unfairly, makes sarcastic comments, tries to belittle your work in front of others. The emotional reaction would be to confront them immediately. But the Machiavellian strategy, politics guided by reality, not ideals, works differently. You maintain a physical presence, continue performing your role, continue producing results, but you become emotionally unreachable. You don't engage in petty disputes. You don't respond to minor provocations. You simply observe. This kind of posture communicates something powerful without saying a single word. I don't play this game. This is what Machiavelli would call the calculated use of force. Not all force needs to be visible. Sometimes, the greatest sign of power is precisely the absence of reaction. Emotionally disciplined people understand that energy is a strategic resource. Spending it on every trivial conflict weakens your position. Saving it for decisive moments strengthens your authority. It's like commanding your own loyal armies within a fortress. You don't mobilize them for every noise outside. You wait for the right moment. Strategic retreat creates enough distance for people's true intentions to be revealed. And when they are revealed, you begin to see clearly who truly deserves your attention and who deserves something far more powerful than confrontation: your silence. When someone begins to understand the power of strategic silence, an inevitable question arises. To whom exactly should this silence be applied? Because you see, it's not about living in isolation or treating everyone coldly. That would be a lack of social intelligence. Machiavelli always warned that the true strategist observes real human nature before acting. And when you observe carefully, you realize that there are basically three types of people who constantly test your emotional control: declared enemies, recurring critics, and what many call energy vampires. Each of them requires a different approach. It's not about reacting impulsively. It's about acting with constant adaptability, like someone who understands the game they're playing on. Let's start with declared enemies. These are easy to identify. They are people who compete with you directly, try to diminish your reputation, or seek to weaken your position in some environment. The instinctive reaction of many people is to confront immediately. But Machiavelli would teach something different. Avoid reacting predictably. When an enemy provokes you and you respond emotionally, they control the pace of the game. But when you encounter silence, the terrain changes. Silence creates uncertainty, and uncertainty breeds caution. In many situations, the best move is simply to continue advancing towards your objectives while the adversary expends energy trying to provoke a reaction. It's the modern equivalent of maintaining your own loyal armies, protecting your fortress, while the enemy wastes resources attacking walls that don't yield. The second group consists of constant critics. Not all critics are enemies. Some even offer useful observations. But there are those whose criticism doesn't seek improvement. It only seeks to diminish the value of others. These individuals generally feed on emotional reaction. It's almost a psychological fuel. When you repeatedly try to convince, justify, or defend yourself, you end up reinforcing their position. This is where the appearance of virtue that Machiavelli described comes in, maintaining a dignified, calm, and confident posture without falling into minor provocations. You remain polite, you remain professional, but you don't offer a stage for unnecessary disputes. Interestingly, when someone stops reacting to this type of criticism, something interesting happens. Only the third type of person remains, the one who truly challenges the emotional discipline of any strategist, those who drain energy without you realizing it. There is a skill that separates ordinary people from silent strategists, the ability not to react immediately. It seems simple, but it isn't. In fact, it's one of the most difficult emotional disciplines one can develop. Most people live reacting to the world as if every provocation were a mandatory call to response. A criticism appears, and there comes the defense. A snide comment arises, and the mind already begins to prepare arguments. But those who understand true human nature realize something fundamental. Reacting all the time gives control to others. Machiavelli spoke of virtue precisely in this sense, the ability to govern oneself before attempting to govern any external circumstance. And governing oneself begins with a rare skill, knowing when to do nothing. Stoic philosophers called this apatheia, a state of serenity in the face of external emotions. It doesn't mean absence of feeling, but mastery over one's own reaction. Imagine someone at work making an ironic comment about you in front of other people. Most would react instantly. Perhaps they would raise their voice, perhaps try to prove something, perhaps engage in a small ego battle. But the strategist observes first, breathes, analyzes the scenario. Often they simply decide not to respond. This type of posture is a true calculated use of emotional force, because those who maintain control over their own reactions are seen differently. Emotionally disciplined people are difficult to manipulate, and when someone realizes they can't provoke you, they usually stop trying. Training this discipline requires conscious practice. It doesn't come naturally. A simple way to start is to create a small space between stimulus and reaction. When something irritating happens, a criticism, a provocation, a small injustice, try waiting 10 seconds, a minute, sometimes a whole day before responding. This small interval completely changes the quality of your decisions. It's exactly the kind of decision based on real human nature that Machiavelli valued. Because often, silence at that moment prevents useless conflicts and preserves your position in the long run. Over time, this posture creates something curious. People begin to realize that you don't react like most. And when that happens, relationships begin to reorganize around you like pieces on a large social chessboard, where those who demonstrate less emotional dependence often come to occupy the strongest position. When someone begins to master silence and emotional discipline, a curious phenomenon begins to appear in relationships. Power dynamics shift, not because you said something different, but because you stopped reacting like everyone else. In the great social chess game of life, there is a silent rule that few perceive. Whoever demonstrates less emotional dependence generally possesses greater power in the relationship. This doesn't mean coldness or absolute indifference. It simply means that your inner stability doesn't depend on anyone's immediate approval. Machiavelli understood this very well when he said that politics should be guided by reality, not by ideals. In the reality of human relationships, people tend to value more what they cannot easily control, and someone who masters their emotions becomes exactly that, difficult to control. Consider how this works in the business world. Imagine an important negotiation, an investor trying to close a deal, an entrepreneur discussing partnership terms, or even a conversation about a promotion within a company. Often, the person who demonstrates the most urgency ends up losing power. When someone seems desperate to close a deal, the other side instantly notices, and when they notice, they adjust their position. This is where one of the hardest lessons of strategy comes in. The end justifies the means when the goal is to preserve your strategic position. It's not about cheap manipulation, but about understanding the game. In complex negotiations, whoever maintains a calm, silent, and patient posture usually controls the pace of the conversation. While the other side tries to convince, argue, or pressure, the strategist observes. This stance is very reminiscent of the logic of commanding your own loyal armies within a fortress. You don't send your troops to every small conflict. You choose battles, you choose moments. And above all, you choose when not to act. In personal relationships, this manifests itself similarly. People who care less about external approval tend to be perceived as more confident. Interestingly, this attracts respect. Not because they are trying to impress someone, but because they demonstrate something rare, emotional autonomy. This is where Machiavellian virtue manifests itself again, the ability to adapt behavior as the context demands. And when someone masters this skill, they realize something uncomfortable about most people. Many live trapped in a constant need for validation, and this need can become one of the greatest strategic weaknesses someone can have. There is a silent trap that ensnares more people than any declared enemy: the constant need for approval. At first glance, it seems harmless. Everyone likes recognition, right? The problem begins when this need starts to guide decisions. When someone begins to mold their attitudes to please, avoid criticism, or gain acceptance, little by little they give up something extremely valuable: autonomy. Machiavelli observed that many leaders fell not for lack of strength, but for trying too hard to please. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, requires understanding something harsh about real human nature. Respect rarely arises from submission. It emerges from the perception of strength and stability. That is why the famous maxim, "better to be feared than loved," provided one avoids being hated, still echoes centuries later, because it points to a delicate balance between approval and authority. Now consider how many everyday decisions are influenced by this desire for validation. People who respond immediately to any online criticism, professionals who avoid disagreeing with a superior even when they know the decision is bad, friends who accept unfair situations just to avoid conflict. This behavior creates a kind of invisible psychological prison. Every external opinion becomes a judgment. Every silence turns into anxiety. Every disagreement becomes a threat. Gradually, the person begins to act not based on decisions grounded in real human nature, but based on the fear of disapproval. And this fear is easily perceived by others. In the social chess game, those who demonstrate fear of losing acceptance tend to lose ground on the board. This is where an important lesson from Machiavellian strategy comes in. Preserving power requires constant adaptability and clarity about priorities. Not every opinion deserves a response. Not every criticism deserves energy. Not every person deserves access to your emotions. Imagine someone constantly trying to provoke you in a professional environment. If each comment generates a reaction, this person begins to control your behavior. But when they realize that their attempts have no impact, the game changes. The absence of reaction creates a space where only truly relevant actions continue to receive your attention. And this emotional filter produces something powerful. Focus. Focus on projects, on growth, on building something bigger than small disputes. It is at this point that an interesting transformation in someone's posture begins to emerge, a transformation that causes provocation, criticism, and external judgment to lose almost all their power of influence. When someone goes through this process of understanding silence, mastering their own reactions, and freeing themselves from the need for validation, something profound begins to happen internally. A form of emotional sovereignty emerges that few people achieve. It's not arrogance nor exaggerated coldness. It's something much simpler and, at the same time, much rarer: inner stability. Machiavelli described effective leaders as those capable of acting with virtue, maintaining control over their decisions even when the surrounding environment is full of tension, criticism, or uncertainty. This posture creates something that, in the eyes of others, seems almost inexplicable. People who cannot manage their emotions begin to see you as someone difficult to reach, and when someone is difficult to reach, they naturally become respected. Think of someone who masters this posture in a competitive environment. It could be a business person, a leader, or even someone in a social circle where ego clashes happen all the time. When provocative comments arise, this person doesn't react immediately. When someone tries to diminish their value, they don't engage in emotional debate. Instead, they maintain a firm stance and remain focused on their goals. This attitude communicates something powerful without needing words. I don't need to prove anything to you. This type of presence conveys exactly what Machiavelli considered essential for those who wish to maintain a position of power, an appearance of virtue coupled with decisions based on real human nature. People perceive calmness, control, and confidence. And interestingly, many begin to adjust their behavior around someone who demonstrates this stability. This state can be described as becoming emotionally untouchable. It doesn't mean criticism disappears or that the world stops testing you. It simply means that these pressures cease to determine your reactions. It's as if you're walking the social chessboard with a new clarity about the game. While many remain trapped in petty disputes, trying to win every argument or prove their worth in every conversation, you begin to operate with calculated use of force, carefully choosing where to invest your energy. Over time, this creates something even more valuable than winning small battles: reputation. And strategic reputation, as Machiavelli knew very well, often decides conflicts before they even begin. But achieving this level of control requires a final decision, a decision that completely transforms how one faces provocations, challenges, and their own purpose in life. After understanding all of this, an inevitable moment of decision arises. Because strategic knowledge by itself doesn't transform anything, what transforms is how someone decides to act based on that knowledge. Machiavelli observed that many men perfectly understood the principles of power, but few had the courage to apply them. And here's the truth that almost no one likes to hear. Most people remain trapped in cycles of provocation, reaction, and emotional exhaustion simply because they have never trained themselves to act in another way. It's almost automatic. Someone provokes, the ego reacts. Someone criticizes, the need to justify arises. But when someone begins to act based on politics guided by reality, not by ideals, they realize something liberating. Many battles simply don't need to be fought. Ignoring small provocations is not weakness, it's strategy. Think about the impact this has on a lifetime. Imagine a person who consciously decides to stop reacting to every provocation, every malicious comment, every attempt to diminish their worth. Suddenly, something that previously seemed always scarce becomes abundant: energy. Mental energy to build projects, develop skills, create wealth, strengthen genuine relationships, and expand their own influence. This is exactly the kind of constant adaptability that Machiavelli considered essential for those who wish to thrive in competitive environments. Instead of wasting energy trying to prove their worth to everyone, the strategist directs their attention to what truly matters. It's like commanding your own loyal armies. You don't mobilize your forces for every distant noise. You carefully choose where to fight, and most importantly, when not to fight. Over time, this posture creates something powerful, a legacy of poise and presence. People begin to realize that you don't engage in petty games, that you don't react impulsively, that your decisions are based on real human nature and not on momentary emotions. This kind of reputation completely changes how the world interacts with you. Provocations decrease, respect increases, and opportunities begin to appear more frequently. Because those who maintain a firm and silent posture convey something rare: control. In the end, true power has never been in winning arguments, but in choosing which battles deserve your attention. And when someone understands this deeply, they realize that each day offers a simple yet transformative choice: to continue reacting to the world, or to finally begin to govern their own position within it. Now think honestly for a moment. How many times have you wasted energy trying to explain something to someone who never wanted to understand? How many times have you responded to provocations that deep down didn't deserve even a second of your attention? The truth is that most people spend their entire lives reacting to the world as if every external opinion were an order that needs to be answered. But those who truly understand real human nature realize something different. Power rarely lies in winning arguments. Power lies in choosing when to remain silent. Machiavelli already warned that decisions based on reality and not on naive ideals produce much more solid results. And the reality is simple: whoever controls their own reactions controls their position in the game. Now imagine applying this practically to your life. The next time someone tries to provoke you, don't respond immediately. Observe, analyze. Use silence as a calculated use of emotional force. When criticism arises, ask yourself, does this opinion really deserve my energy? When someone tries to test your patience, remember something essential: it's better to be feared than loved, as long as you avoid being hated. This means maintaining a firm, dignified and strategic posture. It's not about becoming cold or distant. It's about developing virtù, the ability to govern your own emotions with discipline. And when this discipline becomes part of your posture, the relationships around you inevitably change. So now, here's an important question for you. From today onward, will you continue reacting to every provocation, or will you start choosing your battles like a true strategist? How many arguments could disappear from your life if you simply decided not to engage in them? How many people would lose power over you if they realized they could no longer control your reactions? Think about it. And if this kind of strategic knowledge makes sense to you, then you already know the next step. Subscribe to the channel and activate notifications, because here you continue learning how to understand human nature, develop a strategic posture, and apply principles that few dare to teach openly. After all, this kind of knowledge isn't just for understanding the game, it's for playing it better.